That's the recording started now.
Can I remind everyone that this meeting will be recorded and it will be put on the East Renfrewshire Council's website. Welcome to everyone. This is a very new experience for me, and I know we have some new members in this cabinet and also some new members of the police. So welcome, Jane, to your first meeting as well. Do we have any report of apologies for absence?
Yes, we've got apologies from councillors Devlin, MacDonald and Wallace.
Thank you, Shan. That's much appreciated. Item 2 of the agenda, do we have any declarations of interest?
No.
Thank you. Now, further ado, we will move on to item 3 of the agenda, which is the Police Scotland Performance Report for the 4th quarter of 2021 to 2022.
Thanks, Chair. A very good morning, everybody. For those who haven't met me before, I am Mark Sutherland. I'm the Divisional Commander for Policing across Greater Glasgow. The first thing I would like to do is welcome the new members to the Police and Fire Cabinet. You're all very welcome, and I very much look forward to a successful and meaningful collaboration over the next 4 years as we continue to serve the communities of East Renfrewshire. And of course, I welcome back to a few old members who are well used to seeing my face and hearing my dulcet tones over the last couple of years now. It's always a good forum for us to not just share the performance, but to provide some context round about that policing performance and to have open discussions as to what's driving that and how we can work together in partnership to improve the outcomes and the well-being of communities across East Renfrewshire. I think it would also be remiss of me not to thank the outgoing chair in terms of Councillor Colin Merrick, who has looked after us over the last few years, and we wish him all the best as well. I've already mentioned partnership working, and I think in essence this cabinet is at its best when it explores the partnership opportunities that exist around East Renfrewshire. This is of course in legislation the scrutiny committee, and there is of course a remit and a purpose there to look at policing performance and fire performance and to understand that. But I think we're at our best when we understand the context of that performance and that we understand that policing and fire are one part of a collaboration that comes together to deliver safer communities across East Renfrewshire. And with that in mind, I think as we move forward, those who have been on the cabinet for some time will know that I have been at meeting after meeting with very good policing performance and have very deliberately not celebrated that, because we knew there would be a time after the pandemic, or when we began to emerge from the pandemic. At least it's certainly still ongoing, isn't it? But we're in a far better place. And we knew that return to normality would begin to put pressures onto policing performance, and would begin to put pressure onto statistical reporting in particular. And we can see some of that beginning to emerge already round about domestic abuse crime, round about acquisitive crime, and some of those trends are trends that we're seeing nationally. So I think it's important that we remember the impact of COVID, and we'll continue to try and draw out what we think the impact of COVID is and how that has impacted on policing performance. A lot of you will be new to the report as well that you're seeing. So I had the opportunity to meet the chair yesterday and discuss the report and the type of context and the type of statistics that we provide in it. And as we move forward over the first couple of meetings, I'd be more than happy to take feedback from any members of the cabinet on things that you would like to see included in the report and things that aren't there. Or alternative ways of presenting that to you. We're always keen to find the best way of sharing and providing the relevant information that the cabinet want to see. Of course, the chair's already welcomed Jane Taylor. My thanks also go to Alan Gray, who served East Renfrewshire not for a huge amount of time, but very well, and certainly made a lot of good friendships and professional relationships in a short period of time, and served East Renfrewshire well. And I've no doubt that Jane, with the experience that she has, particularly in community policing, will continue that for policing in East Renfrewshire. I suppose it might be worthwhile as we move forward just to think about the local policing plan for East Renfrewshire as well. It's not something that we always do, or I certainly haven't done in recent cabinets, because members were familiar with the local policing plan. So there is a local policing plan which we can share either in full or as an executive summary with members, although it should be on the website. And in East Renfrewshire, there are really two key priorities, one being crime, reducing crimes of greatest concern and detecting offenders and protecting vulnerable people, working with partners and the most vulnerable to reduce risk. So that's the two main priorities that are on the local policing plan for East Renfrewshire. After this, we'll go on to talk about the public health approach that we have been implementing in Greater Glasgow and now rolling out into East Renfrewshire. That's been ongoing for about 1.5 years now and is really gaining some traction. We'll speak a wee bit more about that. And both crime and protecting vulnerable people are very much entwined in a public health approach as we continue to move forward in Greater Glasgow. So moving on to the report itself, before I hand over to Jane, there's not a huge amount that I want to call out in it. In particular, Jane will give a lot more detail and a lot more local context to it. I would remind colleagues that we are looking at the final quarter in this particular report into 21-22. I was very pleased that building on the success of the Safe Summer plan that we had last year, that was rolled on and continued into winter through the Halloween, Guy Fawkes and early Christmas season, and led to a real reduction into the new year period as well, into this quarter, and obviously led to a significant reduction in antisocial behaviour and disorder, which was good, although we know some of that is also as a result of the COVID legislation easing as well. Acquisitive crime is rising. I think that's something that I have said that we would see, and we're seeing that nationally as the kind of world opens up again and that people aren't spending so much time in their home. Obviously, we also have a cost of living crisis, and there's quite a few academic and research papers out there that suggest that's something that we're likely to see moving forward. That doesn't mean, of course, that we just sit back and watch that happening. It is a priority for us, and Jane will speak a wee bit more about that. It's one of the divisional priorities for the next 2 months at the moment moving forward. Although I am pleased that we are still below the 5-year average, so we are still making some good statistical returns in terms of acquisitive crime. Sexual crime in East Renfrewshire reduced, which was actually against the rest of Greater Glasgow in terms of Glasgow City and Eastern Bartonshire. Which is both positive and negative. We always want to ensure that victims have the confidence to come forward and approach police. We know that victims do so in their own time, and we now have a non-recent sexual offences dedicated team who pick up some of the more historical work that's ongoing. But the detection rates were particularly pleasing, and I think that comes on the back of the public protection restructure, which colleagues who have been on the cabinet for a bit longer will have seen over the last wee while, as we begin to make sure that our public protection capacity and capability is appropriate moving forward. As I mentioned, antisocial behaviour and disorder. Our COVID legislation fell within these categories, and that's partly why we're seeing a big decrease. But it's not the full story, and Jane will touch on this a wee bit more and provide some more context about exactly what we're doing and how we're working in partnership across East Renfrewshire to continue to keep people safe and reduce the impact of antisocial behaviour and disorder across East Renfrewshire. And last couple of points from me before I pass over to Jane is highlighting, you'll see some of the good work and some of the challenging incidents that officers have had to face in that final Q4. In particular, in linking it back to the local policing plan and the priorities, I would highlight the continued good work of the banking protocol in East Renfrewshire and the continued good work of the Herbert protocol, both of which really serve to support our vulnerable communities in East Renfrewshire very, very well. And lots of good engagement with the various financial institutions in East Renfrewshire has seen lots of people over the year not becoming the victims of scamming or bogus workman type crimes. And clearly the Herbert protocol, if colleagues aren't aware, is for dementia sufferers and allows effectively action plans to be in place between police and relatives, and if people go missing, gives an idea as to where people might be, and has been hugely successful with a few particularly good cases in East Renfrewshire where people have been found before they've came to harm. So that would be the kind of final two call-outs that I would pass on. I'll take questions at the end, if that's all right, Chair, and move across to Jane to move through the report in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Mark. That's much appreciated. Jane, are you willing to take over? Thank you.
Absolutely. Good morning. Thank you for your kind welcome and for the opportunity to present this policing plan, which is the update, as the boss has already said, for Q4. This is the final quarter of the financial year for 2021-22, and like many of yourselves, this is my first Police and Fire Cabinet, and hopefully it will be the first of many. The update directly relates to our East Renfrewshire policing plan for 2020 to 2023, and highlighting what is of most concern to our communities, and offers me the opportunity to show how those concerns have been addressed through the strong partnership approach with East Renfrewshire. I'll start, as my predecessor did, with a brief summary of how, as an organisation, the policing picture changed in Q4 due to COVID. And I'm happy to report that after police officer absences peaked towards the end of Q3, the beginning of Q4, they're now at their lowest levels since the start of the pandemic, and we're now into single figures. Indeed, I've had several weeks where within East Renfrewshire I've had no COVID absences at all, which is really positive. As the final coronavirus restrictions were lifted and we moved back to business as usual, Operation Tala, which was the police response to COVID, was stood down, and many of those officers returned to their pre-COVID roles. And as an addition, we've also had all the officers that were temporarily seconded to COP26 return, and that includes myself, and that has been a welcome boost as well. Q4 also saw a return to many of our large-scale outdoor and indoor events, each with their unique challenges, many football matches and concerts, and each of these were dealt with through extensive planning and the proportionate policing plans that were put in place by Greater Glasgow. And that affected East Renfrewshire in that officers from East Renfrewshire were working within the Greater Glasgow as a whole. Moving on to acquisitive crime, as Mr Sutherland has already stated, instances of domestic housebreaking were 74. Now that is up from 58 last year, but it's still down about 23% on the 5-year average, which was 96. Now this increase is potentially due to the fact that people are returning to work after furlough or from working from home for the last 2 years. But we continue to work with divisional and organisational-led colleagues to identify the perpetrators carrying out these housebreakings and those who work across policing and local authority boundaries. We've captured many forensic opportunities to support investigations, and we provide security advice to victims and have alerted local residents via social media messaging, community engagement and leaflet drops. So an example of this cross-border work was that in March 2022, 4 men were arrested following a vehicle pursuit in Hamilton, and they face a number of charges at this time. They have been identified as prolific housebreakers, and it's expected that significant further charges will follow related to housebreakings, not only in Scotland, but in England and Wales. And I have an expectation that this will include instances of housebreakings within East Renfrewshire. As we move on to public protection, up to and including Q4, sexual crimes have reduced by 6.4%, and this is compared to the previous year. And it's fallen from 110 crimes to 103. The associated detection rate for this year is 48.5%, which is up significantly from 32.7% last year, and is also higher than the 5-year average of 46.7%. Whilst the fallen number of reported crimes and the rise in detection rates are welcome, improving the detection rates for these crimes will always be a priority. This year to date, we have dealt with 532 domestic abuse incidents. This figure represents a 6% increase compared to the previous 5-year average. The number of domestic abuse incidents with associated crimes is 291, and this is slightly higher than the 2021 figure of 287, however 4% less than the 5-year average. We continue to support victims of domestic abuse, and officers are trained to refer and direct potential victims to their support services. We risk assess to protect victims' safety, working in partnership to ensure appropriate safety planning is in place to protect our victims and their well-being. This is an area where we ensure robust scrutiny with additional support provided by our domestic abuse investigation colleagues. I always feel that the number of offences reported is rising. It's a measure of the confidence that victims have to report to the police, and that we gain access to the support mechanisms that we have in place. Moving on to drug dealing and misuse. We recorded 171 drugs offences by the end of Q4. That, however, is 28% fewer than last year. Drug supply is down 17% on the 5-year average, but up 25% on last year. This is a gradual increase as we return to normality after COVID. With possession offences down 34% on last year, we're ensuring that our officers are proactively policing, using the legislation at their disposal, and that these searches are recorded. We've also, within East Renfrewshire, embarked on an updated training programme to ensure a more focused approach by our officers to searching of offenders. As the Divisional Commander has highlighted, and as we will go into in greater detail later, the public health approach, through the public health approach, we continue to work closely with our colleagues in East Renfrewshire's Drug and Alcohol Partnership and health and social care across a range of issues, with a direct focus on supporting vulnerable members of the community to the relevant support services, and a focus on the peer navigator and lived experience work. The Alcohol and Drugs Partnership also, as promised, funded and delivered an innovative and bespoke mental health training package, which was developed by Sam H. for a number of our response officers in East Ren, and this has greatly enhanced their skill when dealing people with these issues. Violent crime. Year to date, we've recorded 21 serious assaults, which is 8 less than compared to the previous year. This is also 23.4% below the 5-year average. We also had 1 crime of attempted murder, which was recorded during this period, but that was detected. The trend highlighted in Q2 and Q3 has continued in relation to assault and emergency service workers. There were 50 emergency worker assaults, which is up 15 on the previous year. And that's also 42.9% on the 5-year average, which was brought down by an exceptionally low reporting number in 2018-19. This trend, however, is not unique to East Renfrewshire, and it's replicated across the Greater Glasgow. With 44 offences recorded at the end of Q3, Q4 saw a further 6 added to that total. This was a result of 4 separate incidents where the victims were all police officers and the offences of a relatively minor nature. There was no discernible pattern. However, we are much better at reporting now, and I'm hopeful that this will decrease further with the newly modernised officer safety training, and that is double which has historically been conducted. Throughout the year, these assaults involved exclusively police officers, with the exception of 2 incidents last summer where an ambulance technician and a paramedic were assaulted. Robberies remain low at 5. Now that's 6 less than last year and on the 5-year average. The detection rate for this crime currently sits at 100%, which is really, really good. Moving on to antisocial behaviour and disorder. There were a total of 2,089 reports of antisocial behaviour in 21-22, sorry. This is 1,284 less than the previous year, but this is in all likelihood due to a lack of calls regarding COVID breaches or gatherings, which very much dominated our antisocial behaviour calls last year. We continue to work closely with partners on a weekly basis with East Renfrewshire's GRIP meeting, which is, for those of you new, that's Greater Results in Partnership. And we share appropriate information and act in relation to residents who continually engage in this type of behaviour. The demand on police resources with regard to typical antisocial behaviour has returned in East Renfrewshire, and should see normality in the summer months. To that end, planning has commenced to draw up further summer safety campaigns, with the Safer East Renfrewshire plan featuring heavily. Furthermore, work is ongoing with Scottish Water regarding summer water safety and Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to maximise expertise and provide safety information to the people of East Renfrewshire. In particular, the young and vulnerable who gather in places of known risk. We continue to work closely with British Transport Police, who support policing in East Renfrewshire by monitoring train activity and mitigating issues before they arrive in our community. Now, moving on to page 2, I don't intend to go over specific work that's been outlined in this section of the report, as it's self-explained and it refers to specific incidents that the officers have dealt with. Needless to say, in my short time as Area Commander to East Renfrewshire, I take pleasure on a daily basis in what my officers are achieving and their commitment to keeping the people of East Renfrewshire safe. That, combined with continued collaborative working and collective problem solving that they undertake with their partners across the authority area, just makes me really happy to be in role. Chair, thank you for this opportunity to present this report. That is now concluding my part. I'm happy to take any questions that you or any other members may have.
Can I ask a question on violent crime and specifically about emergency workers being subject to assaults? Are there any steps being taken to mitigate this risk?
Well, as I had said, we now, as Police Scotland, have embarked on improved officer safety training for our officers. Many of them have not had a tremendous amount of contact with the public over COVID, so we're now getting back to normal. Also, the figures are higher and mainly exclusively on police officers. I like to think due to the fact that we're encouraging officers to report assaults. There's a big push to make sure that officers are aware that it's not part of their job. To be assaulted when they are dealing with incidents is not correct, it's not normal, and we want it to be reported because we want it to be dealt with properly. So that probably leads to a greater rise, and that rise will probably continue.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question from you, Councillor Bath.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Jane. I think it's important that we remind residents that we have the lowest crime rate in mainland Scotland, thanks to our police partners, and I never tire of telling people that, because sometimes what you hear suggests otherwise. I've got a couple of observations, one a question, and you'll get to know that I ask this every single time. So my question, and I'm glad you highlighted it around domestic violence and adult protection, and it's the only figure that, it sounds a bit perverse, but we want the numbers to go up, because as you say, it indicates that there is confidence in the system, and we want people to come forward because we know it's happening. Having low figures doesn't mean it's not happening, it's just that not always, there isn't always a confidence. The numbers you have quoted about going up 6%, etc., isn't really reflected in what the HSCP see and what the health board see in terms of adult support and protection and domestic violence, because there seems to be a disparity. And I'm just wondering, I know you said that you have things in place and training, so I just want to ensure that that's continuing, because there clearly is some reason that people are needing support from other services, but they're perhaps not reporting it to the police. So I just want assurance that we are continuing to ensure that people are confident enough in the police system that they can report it. And the other thing I want to touch on is, I'm glad you mentioned about the waterways, because we're already seeing, and I know you mentioned a couple of places in particular, in the Picket Law in Eaglesham, and we already know, and I know this is a retrospective report, it's for Q4, but because the weather eventually is starting to improve, there are more and more young people starting to gather up there, and I know this is an example of the collaborative work between yourselves and Scottish Fire and Rescue around trying to keep our young people safe up there. So I just want assurance that that is one of the places that you're including in your scrutiny and your enhanced surveillance. And will you be using, we had a report, a presentation a few months ago before the elections about drones, and I know we're starting to use those in East Renfrewshire, with obviously there are very strict caveats about it. Are we thinking of using that for things like up at the picket law, just to keep an eye on what's going on? Thank you.
Jane, do you want to answer about the picket law and the drone, and I'll pick up on domestic violence?
Absolutely. Councillor Van, with regards to the drone, absolutely, that is something that we will be looking at. As you say, there are very strict caveats. We have to follow very strict guidelines. But as we had a discussion with Councillor Pragnell yesterday, it's an availability issue occasionally. Police Scotland have access to 2 drones. There's one in the north of the country and there's one in the west of the country. So we bid for use of that drone like many other divisions within the west and the east. But if we put a good business case together and present that, it's certainly one of the many tools that I will be looking to deploy this summer. Go back to picket law as well. A few weeks ago, I was up at picket law personally, along with Fire and Rescue, Ambulance Service, Scottish Water and East Renfrewshire Council. And we had a walk round, which was very, very informative for me. We looked at there is a plan now been put in place that should it go wrong, which hopefully it won't due to the diversionary tactics that we have in place, that every responder is very clear on what their role is, where they would be able to launch a boat, where they could park their appliances, where they would go to make sure that should something go wrong, that the person who is in trouble will have the very best chance of surviving that incident. But we don't ever want to get to that stage. So that is why there is enhanced patrols, there is advanced knowledge from the officers, potential of putting the drone up. Scottish Water know that to phone us. So yeah, it's very much on our radar, and it's something that we're taking forward, not only for picket law, but for the other areas of water within East Renfrewshire.
Okay, thanks, Jane. I think, as you say, it's not so much a capacity issue. We are one of the only organisations, police forces, that actually have drones in use, and it's taken some amount of time. And it's interesting when you use the term enhanced surveillance, and I don't think that's quite what you meant. I think you meant how do we direct resources to what priorities across the division. So I think we need to bear in mind proportionality here as well. What we're tackling is public safety. And what we're looking at is how do we keep communities safe, and that exists across East Renfrewshire and across Greater Glasgow and beyond. And we need to target our specialist resources and specialist equipment to where the need is greatest. And clearly that was in East Renfrewshire for a period of time last year, and we had very good support from not just the police drone, but also from mounted units and from a whole range of specialist services that came in to support us in East Renfrewshire. And Jane will continue to work with colleagues to make sure that if it's appropriate, that we are getting the right support from specialist services to support our own response and community police officers in East Renfrewshire, to work alongside the fire service and a range of other partners round about the waterways. In terms of domestic violence, I very much support a lot of what you say about the importance of victim confidence in policing. But domestic abuse, I think the days of looking at the way that the police deal with domestic violence, or the social services or health, is I hope we're moving on in terms of the response to domestic violence is very much a collaboration and very much a collective. You know, we look at it in the Chief Officers Group through East Renfrewshire, and we deal with these partners on a daily basis, whereby referrals will come in and we will have multi-agency discussions about victims and the best way forward. And tackling domestic domestic violence, you know, it starts with the individual in the home, and we hope and we understand that victims will have, they'll find their own time to come forward, and we continue to encourage them to do so. But there's also, you know, we've seen the cocoon watch type of stuff with neighbours and families and referring into police and through. That's why we have third party reporting and other ways to report domestic violence. And then it's down to the agencies themselves. We are the first responders, and we work very closely with, as you say, Health and Social Care Partnership to make sure that victims are supported through their health journey, but also through the criminal justice journey as well. And it's exceptionally important that we continue to drive that confidence. We've had some good examples of that in the last couple of years in East Renfrewshire. You remember the lamppost posters and other bits and pieces trying to drive forward victim confidence in policing, and we'll continue to do that. Our public protection unit, as you'll maybe remember from the presentations about restructure, and we have dedicated domestic abuse investigators. We work very closely, as I say, with the partners across East Renfrewshire to ensure victim safety where we can, and it absolutely remains a focus for us, so I can give you that assurance moving forward.
Thank you. I believe that Councillor O'Donnell has a question, and then after that we'll move to Councillor Anderson.
Hi there. Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of clarifications. Obviously, I'm new to this cabinet. The first one is really clarification of the police policy and public health policy approach to drug use, particularly to how that deals with cannabis use and possession versus other harder drugs use and possession. The second point is really on online scams and mobile scams. Those are getting increasingly sophisticated, and obviously those, you know, more elderly or more vulnerable will be very prone to this, although it's, you know, some of them are getting so clever now that they look genuine. So I think the question there really is, who should residents report these types of scams to? It's unclear to me, and if it's unclear to me, it's probably unclear to a lot of the wider population. So thank you.
These scams should absolutely be reported to the police. It's completely unacceptable, and if they're reported to us, we are able to see patterns. We're doing a lot of really good work with regards to social media messaging. My officer, who's the local authority liaison officer, is working really closely with a lot of the other voluntary organisations. We're putting messaging out there, as the Commander has previously spoken of. We have the banking protocol. There are lots of different security measures being put in place, but they must report it to us absolutely through 101. We have online reporting through Contact Us. But absolutely, we would encourage anybody who has been the victim of a scam, no matter how sophisticated or unsophisticated, that they get in contact.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
The cannabis use you spoke of, the drugs legislation is clear. It's not a case of certain aspects of the drugs legislation that is ignored. If an offence is committed, it will be dealt with appropriately.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we move on to Councillor Anderson?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, it's going back to what was discussed previously about the picket law, and it's just it's my ward, and I was at the community council meeting, and they specifically spoke about this, and so it's good to hear work's been done and your awareness of it, because it's something they're also talking about. But they also realise that you know, as young people, some of them grew up in that area and probably did the same thing themselves by visiting, you know, that area, and so for them it's a balance of letting the children or the kids grow up, you know, safely, and that's the key thing, is to allow them time with their friends and so forth, but also keeping them safe. So there is another community meeting about to come up, Jane, that and I think it would be good possibly if one of your community officers could come along. I think it might be on the 20th for the Eaglesham Waterfoot Community Council, and really, I mean, I could go and talk about it, but I think it'd be really good for one of your officers to be there, possibly, if they could do that. No?
Absolutely, they have certainly recommenced attending these community council meetings, and the community policing sergeant here has taken this on board, and he's leading on that piece of work. I unfortunately am leave, otherwise I would be delighted to attend myself and speak to you, but you're absolutely correct, and the commander is really keen on that, as am I, that it has to be proportionate, and children and young adults have to enjoy themselves and they have to learn, and we cannot criminalise these young adults. So absolutely proportionate response to the behaviour, and I will speak to my sergeant and make sure that he or one of his community officers are there at that meeting.
Great, excellent. Thank you.
I know that Chief Superintendent Sutherland would like to come in. His hand is raised.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Jane's partly answered or said what I was going to pick up on, which was Councillor Anderson's points about letting kids be kids, and actually the difficult balance police have between lower level antisocial behaviour and proportionality round about. You know, we spoke about the use of the drone and when it's appropriate. You know, I think we always try and wrestle with the balance of the rights of the young people and the rights that young people have, and that broader the broader ECHR principles versus the police activity. But what I suppose what we will say is we will not over police the young people of East Renfrewshire, you know, and it's trying to, as you say, let young people be young people. But at the same time, we will respond to calls of public nuisance and react appropriately. And where we will most definitely step that up, though, of course, is, as you say, when there is a real public safety concern and a real worry that actually young people are going to come to serious harm through the use of the waterways, particularly when that's mixed with alcohol misuse, etc. So, you know, exactly as you've called out, it's a difficult balance to get, and that's one that we're always seeking to achieve.
Thank you. Have we got any other questions? I know some. Sorry, Councillor Bamford.
Yeah, sorry, it was just, and I don't want to labour the point about the picket law, but I am aware of all the work that goes on here locally in East Renfrewshire, because it obviously is within our boundaries. But I am aware that a lot of the young people that go up to the picket law are coming from Ayrshire and further afield, East Kilbride, Ayrshire, you know, the local the authorities that are share our boundary. And I just wondered if for things like the picket law and wider for other larger waterways, whether you liaise with police forces in those other areas and with local authorities and fire service in those other areas, because obviously if what you're saying is about what we're trying to do is like Councillor Anderson says, to allow young people to have some kind of freedom with but to make them aware of the risks. So it's just for some confirmation that it isn't just within East Renfrewshire we do this, although really that's what we're interested in, but actually we're all interested in the safety of our young people. So do you speak to other local authorities and other fire services and other police services to ensure that they're all trying to give their young people the same message?
Absolutely, and I don't want to answer on behalf of the fire service, but we have really a close relationship with British Transport Police, and that's often the first sign that people are headed in our direction. They are really good at confiscating alcohol, so yeah, definitely the transport networks, we regularly meet with them, and they're often give us the first heads up that there's a load of people heading our way. The commander meets with other commanders. Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a lot of collaboration going on. We're not working in a silo.
Unfortunately, I get what you're saying, and I agree that the transport is a problem. Not a problem, it's a great way of preempting it. However, if you know where the picket law is, there isn't any transport. These young people that go to the picket law tend to get there by driving each other or their parents or other people driving. There are no trains and there are virtually no buses, but that's a whole other story. So young people getting there, you know, so whilst the preemptive work of the transport police would be useful for other seaside resorts, for want of a better word, but the kind of young places young people gather, that's not really going to work for places like the picket law, which are out of the way, which young people go to, partly because it is out of the way. So I think there has to be other things put in place. That's why I'm thinking, is there more that is done in terms of, you know, education in the schools and whatever means, because that's really where we'll have to target these young people and their families, because ultimately that just baffles me why you know, as a parent of 4 children who are not really children anymore, but why you would drive your young person to somewhere like the picket law with alcohol. Maybe the parents need some education as to what balance there has to be between allowing the young people some freedom but actually keeping them safe.
There's a lot of work done in the schools by the campus officers, and the last time there was a large gathering, it was the campus officers that had alerted us to that. The world is a much smaller place now due to social media. So these gatherings are all arranged on social media, they're spoken about in schools, and the campus officers have such a good relationship with the schools in the area that they're often alerted as well, and then they're the ones that alert us to it. I think the commander wants to come in on that as well.
Yeah, thanks. I'd just pick up and just reaffirm on what you've said, Jane. Councillor Bamford, I think the first thing is the picket law, sadly, is not unique. When we think about Mugdock Park, when we think about Ayrshire, and we think about Balloch, you know, just as other areas that jump into my mind. Mugdock Park obviously sits within, or part of it sits within the Greater Glasgow Division as well, so it's part of our policing responsibility, and we work with police colleagues and other partners in all of these areas to share best practice and learn about what works, and to learn about what interactions at the school works, to look at social media campaigning. A lot of the campaigning is round about the parental responsibility that you've alluded to, so we do a lot of media reporting round about, you know, do you know where your children are, which is a difficult one. I'm a parent as well, and we all, you know, you don't like to be told you're maybe not quite doing your job as well as you should, but it's important that parents take that responsibility to understand exactly where their children are on a given occasion, and understand some of the dangers of open water. And each of these areas has their own unique challenges in terms of transport, etc. So it is important, you know, I mean, some of the kids do get the train to Clarkston and then try and make their way up from there. It's actually not, you know, it's not that far a walk to get up from Clarkston or Busby, and it is important that the BTP and other transport agencies are connected into us, and the role of the campus corps is particularly important. So, you know, I hope that we've done, you know, quite a bit of discussion on it. I hope you can be assured from what we did last year, which was a lot of positive work. You know, Jane's taken that learning into this summer. The fire service, I think Alan's going to come in as well and talk about it, and we're well placed. Should we get the sun again, I'm looking out my window here and it's not too great, but should we get the sun and the good weather, we're certainly well placed to respond.
Can I invite Alan to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bamford, it was just to kind of reinforce and hopefully apply a bit of confidence to the work that we're doing just now. So myself and Jane was up recently at Picket Law, and we've formed a water safety group, which has currently been led by Gordon Sweeney, the police sergeant. So all partners involved there are briefed on the need to advise if there's any activity there. One of the key things we've got is that the Scottish Water personnel, when they're up there, they're looking for activity every day, and as soon as they notify that there's any activity, they'll notify everybody in the group. So that lets us know, and that starts the ball rolling. We can stand our group up probably within about half an hour or an hour. We've all got direct contacts. We've just recently put out a contact list to each member of the group, and currently as a service, we've just contacted circa 1,500 people within the schools of East Renfrewshire we've been in contact with all the schools. We've also had our appliances out, and they've carried out familiarisation visits to not only Picket Law, but all open bodies of water within East Renfrewshire. We've completed instant response plans for them. And the benefit of doing that is, for example, as Jane will support me on this, when we went to Picket Law, there's a perfectly adequate launch site there, but it's not suitable for putting a hard-bodied boat in. So we've identified an alternative route. That information has been out to all our personnel, so that saves for a delay when we got there. So the water safety group's been a huge benefit, and we'll continue to work together with colleagues to ensure that as soon as we are notified any activity at all, we'll put everything in place. And I would just like to add on, as I'm sure Mark was aware of when Alan was here, we did utilise the drone the last time, extremely beneficial, and it was able to give us a picture of what was going on over one really hot weekend and paint a picture that we couldn't see. So all these things coming together, I think we're doing a lot of positive work, and we'll continue to do that and work together as a group. So thank you.
Thank you. If we have no other questions, could we move to agenda item 4, which is the Police Scotland Public Health Approach to Policing?
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I'd like to introduce then Chief Inspector Greg Robertson. Greg is our Public Health Coordinator in Greater Glasgow, and Greg is actually the first, and to my mind, to my knowledge, the only dedicated public health police officer that we have in Police Scotland, and has done a lot of good work taking the kind of principles and ideology of the public health approach and some of the early work, and taking that on and building relationships with Public Health Scotland to get us to where we are now. And Greg's going to come on and talk a wee bit more detail about some of the actual more detailed activity that we have going on. I'm going to try and keep this fairly quick because I'm conscious of time and conscious of to give sufficient room for colleagues in fire and rescue on the other side of this presentation. So this is really just a kind of information and awareness session for colleagues today. The public health approach in Greater Glasgow started probably late 2020 into the very early parts of 2021. I actually came into Glasgow in September, or came back to Glasgow in September 2020, after having set up our response to the pandemic within Police Scotland, or contributed to that. And within there, I built a lot of relationships up with Public Health Scotland, and it came to my mind that policing had been asked to do something that we hadn't really been asked to do before, which was to take a public health issue and really to drive a dedicated policing approach to try and impact on public health. And of course, that's something that in many ways we've done for many decades and longer than that, but actually to bring it into focus and to think about how that approach could actually serve the communities of East Renfrewshire, East Dunbartonshire and Glasgow City took us on the delivery of this public health approach. And part of it then came down to actually asking public health partners, what is it that you need from policing to improve health outcomes for communities? And the reason I think that that's so important is that the demand on policing continues to grow. We know that vulnerability is a huge part of policing, and of course that's why we have vulnerability as part of our local policing plan in East Renfrewshire. And only by improving the health outcomes of communities can we then begin to reduce policing demand that allows us to then generate some capacity and drive that into the prevention space. And so, what is public health from a policing context, and what is it more broadly? We know that public health, is not just about curing people of illness. It's about community safety. It's about poverty. It's about addiction. It's about what we've seen in the pandemic. And why is it important for the police? Well, because we are first responders, we are very often the agency who can hear and see these wider issues, such as that neglect and poverty, where we see children who are poorly fed and poorly nourished, where we see vulnerable adults through early dementia and a whole range of other issues, and particularly round about addictions. We know that Greater Glasgow continues to be badly affected by drugs deaths. We know that Greater Glasgow continues to have alcohol issues, and while we focus rightly, we focus a lot on drugs deaths. Alcohol remains a huge factor in all of the policing that we do. When we look at our violent crime, when we look at domestic violence, alcohol is very often a trigger for that, and so our continued work on addiction from a public health approach remains to be important. The wee slide at the bottom was really one that was developed during the pandemic, and it took us from the 1750s when we looked at the smallpox vaccine right back to 2020 when we were suddenly chasing a vaccine again, which thankfully now seems to be doing its job at least enough for us to open society up a wee bit more. And what do we do with that vulnerability when we come across it? Well, we have recorded it for a number of years through our vulnerable persons database. But actually it got us thinking about, are we recording the right information? Is that information serving our public health partners in the right way? And what do our public health partners need from policing to ensure that actually they're getting a better service once we refer people on to other agencies? And of course, when Police Scotland was enacted, it gave us a policing purpose in legislation, which was to improve the safety and well-being of people, places and communities in Scotland. And actually the public health approach allows us to actually contribute in a better way towards what is our legislative function. We just move it on, Greg, thanks, to the next slide. So in Glasgow we created our vision and principles. You'll see in the middle is the vision that through a better citizen approach, policing in Greater Glasgow will demonstrate a long-term commitment to strengthen and support partners to collectively improve the health outcomes of our population. And so the vision itself, that better citizen approach, is really one that's embedded in community policing. You know, we are the community. You know, a lot of police officers actually stay within the community that they work. But we consider ourselves to be part of the community, whether we reside there or not. And it's only by considering yourself to be part of that community that you deliver the best policing services. And you'll see the bit there about to strengthen and support partners to collectively improve health outcomes. So what this isn't about police overreaching into the public health space and taking additional responsibility for public health. We are very often the service of first and last resort. We have a public health responsibility. To be brutally honest, we don't need more, but what we need to do is contribute better where we are best placed to do so, to make sure that the collaboration and partnership is working better from a public health perspective, because only by doing that will we improve those community outcomes and reduce the demand on policing. You'll see there the 6 kind of principles that sit round about the vision. I don't intend to go through all of them. I've spoken about number 3 in particularly, which is particularly important, round about optimising the opportunities to support in circumstances where police officers are uniquely placed. And this is very much about understanding what other health partners need from policing in terms of that referral and support. The place-based approach to healthier, and that can be either short-term or like we've just been discussing, the place-based approach in terms of the picket law. We know that we continue to do that through open spaces, but actually in a broader context, is there more that we need to do around about some of our areas in East Renfrewshire where we see deprivation and vulnerability existing. So beyond our open spaces, is there more that we can do in some other areas of East Renfrewshire? And number 6 is that demand reduction and reinvesting of capacity into other areas, and we've seen that, or I've described that already rather. So I'll take the next slide, please, Greg, and the final slide that I'm going to pick up on is our strategic objectives. Again, they're pretty much self-explanatory to establish a clear understanding of what public health partners most need from policing, which I've covered. To confirm the priority areas of focus and consult subject matter experts. We've been doing that. We've met the Chief Executive and Kate Rocks from and other members of who provide health and social care across East Renfrewshire, and we continue to work to establish what the best priorities for East Renfrewshire are, and Greg will touch on that a wee bit more. Equip officers and staff with a greater awareness of the policing role in improving public health. This has been a particularly big piece of work when you consider we've got nearly 2,500 staff across Greater Glasgow. And that's about educating officers in what public health is, educating officers in terms of what their responsibilities should be under public health. Trying to change culture is really the big point that I would want to make there. And that we are working very hard across the division to change the culture and have officers think about public health. So when they make an arrest, when they have an interaction with a member of the public, to think about it through a public health lens as well as a criminal justice lens. And actually you could argue that criminal justice and public health shouldn't even be separated and should be actually one part of the same delivery. Data sharing is another area that requires further exploration. I think a better and more intelligent use of data is a particularly interesting topic for us moving forward. Representation at appropriate meetings. I certainly wouldn't want to be in more meetings than I do at the moment, but it's important that we are at the right meetings from a public health perspective. In Glasgow City, for instance, there's a public health oversight board that the police weren't a member of. There will be other meetings in East Renfrewshire that the police could bring more value to from a public health lens, and we'll be looking at that. And 9 is the objective that we brought on earlier this year. I can say hand in heart, before the cost of living crisis really became a thing, but actually with the cost of living crisis, priority number 9 looks like it's going to be ever more important as we continue to work with partners to address and contribute to reducing poverty across Greater Glasgow. So there's lots and lots in that. I'm happy to share the slide deck with colleagues so that you can spend a bit more time to look at it in more detail and take questions either at the next cabinet or just by contacting me or contacting Greg. We'll share our details with that, and I'm happy to have a discussion and see where the opportunities are. But we'll give you a bit more context. Well, what does that actually mean in real life? What are officers doing that's different? How are we actually taking this into action, and Greg will run you through the next few slides to bring that to life.
Thanks, sir, and good morning everyone. Greg Robertson, Chief Inspector for Public Health in Greater Glasgow. So I've been in this post for some time now, and glad to know I'm no stranger to East Renfrewshire. I was a former response inspector in the area, so I know the area well, and we're keen that what we're doing across the city and in other local authority areas is reflected, and I'm going to share with you some of the local work that we've been doing to bring this strategy to life. So our priorities underpinning our strategy won't be any surprise to you, to focus on drugs and harm reduction, mental health with a particular focus on adult support and protection, children, young people, and that final objective we added into contributing to reducing poverty. That's no surprise to anyone that's aware of the work across the area just now. We know that these are areas we want to improve and get people the best service. And ultimately, for me, that is what a public health approach is getting people the right service at the right time, and try and reduce them coming back into contact with services, improve their outcome and their health at the same time, and then ultimately all services benefit from that repeat demand that might be occurring. So our measures of success, and these ones are specifically across the city, but I share them with you deliberately because public health awareness sessions were developed with Public Health Scotland, and really important to inform and equip our officers about how they're delivering public health, and actually deliberately say that because they are delivering it already. We've been adopting this, as the Commander says, for some years now, but how we can inform that and make them aware of what they're doing, and actually get them to think a bit differently when they're dealing with vulnerable adults, vulnerable children, and really prevent them coming into that demand and that contact with service. And I say that because it's not just police services, it's other blue light colleagues, it's HSCP colleagues. So we're doing it collectively across the city to try and make that improvement. A tangible example which will impact on East Renfrewshire, Operation Pivot, is a focus on removing those drug dealers that are exploiting vulnerable people with addictions. And I'd say that again deliberately, and that stands because it is exploiting, in our view, that they're taking advantage of people suffering from an addiction, which is ultimately impacting their mental and physical health. So Operation Pivot spans particularly in the city, but will definitely have an impact in your area given the young people that will be frequenting the city centre, and it's removing those drug dealers and the quantities of drugs from communities from across Greater Glasgow to make that benefit to not have that supply there. We'll touch that we are engaging with HSCP colleagues to monitor the impact of removing any supply, because obviously if someone's addicted to a drug or a substance, they're still going to have that addiction to service. So we work with HSCP colleagues to make sure that they're aware of that. And a different stance taken, our CID officers now look at how we can refer people for support, dealing with the enforcement and the arrest at the time, but then how can we divert them to get support to prevent that person from coming back into criminality or engaging in that activity. Some of you may be aware of a programme that's been running in Glasgow City, but again I deliberately mention it because it's a model that I know that HSCP colleagues in East Renfrewshire are adopting, the Positive Outcomes Project, and that's a collective police HSCP criminal justice model where we work with people who are offending to fund their addiction and get them out of that cycle. Now, in basic terms, that could be making sure that all their supporting appointments that they have to attend for social work, for housing, for addiction support are all in one place. And it might be that we actually have to take them there and support that. But actually what we find is that gets them back onto a better path and actually a decline in offending and getting them away from engaging in criminal activity and improving their overall health outcome. And a final city model, but we definitely benefit, and I know this from first-hand experience in East Renfrewshire, the mental health assessment units. We now have them in place in Levendale and Stop Hill across the city, with colleagues in NHS, Greater Glasgow and Clyde, a real benefit to delivering a better service to those vulnerable people we come into contact with suffering from a mental health crisis. It allows people to get that support there and then. They're not sitting in an A&E putting a demand or actually exacerbating their situation and problems, and allowing them to get that support in quick time. That then also informs and gives our officers that capacity back, because we can get officers back on the street responding to the concerns or the calls in the local area, but we're still getting that person the right help and safeguarding them. You'll be aware of the Police Scotland decision by Chief Constable Ian Livingston for naloxone to be rolled out across the country to officers. That's been particularly successful in the east of the Glasgow City area, where the test of change was met. However, although it's been piloted in the east, that's where the officers have been trained, and if there was an incident where we thought that naloxone would benefit and potentially save a life, those officers are drawn across the city and deployed where the need is. So there may be instances in your area that you've seen benefit from that, but real start statistics, 16 lives saved potentially because there's been administration of naloxone. For me, that's 16 families not having that terrible trauma of a death in their family. We don't have that ripple effect of adverse experiences through bereavement, and a real positive change, and probably the best example for me that we're moving into that public health space in policing even more. We are developing prevention models for officers and reaching back into those objectives we set. How can we make this easier for officers to deliver that? You know that officers have mobile devices now, which are a great addition and a move into giving us better capability to deliver policing in rural areas of communities particularly. But actually what we're looking to do and implemented now is prevention services and easy access to those through the mobile devices. And that's been a development internally in relation to our IT and our internal intranet sites, but using the contact details for third sector organisations, public sector organisations across all 3 local authorities. Officers now have access to that and getting them thinking about prevention so that we hopefully reduce those amount of people that are coming into contact at crisis point and actually getting them support at an early point. It's already been touched on in the call today. We now have a restructure of our public protection teams, which allows us to have dedicated child, adult support teams, sexual harm teams, which is a real evidence that we're aligning our resources to the demand that we're facing, again, to get people that best service. And we now compare our violence and vulnerability data and events policing data. Now, previously we did this anecdotally and where required, but we now typically do it. So if you've got a youth offender, we're looking at why that youth is offended in a particular area. Is there work we can do with their family to get them support and direct that youth into diversion activities before things escalate? So that's a development that's happening across the city and within East Renfrewshire. Particular to your local area, officers have just near enough completed local SAMH training for response officers to raise awareness of mental health, illnesses, how to respond better. we already get online training for this, and there's national packages about to be delivered across the organisation. But for me, we never turn down. Mental health is an ever-changing landscape, and we can always learn how to respond to that in the current trends and what people are experiencing. So that's been a real positive experience for officers locally, and in particular, I think the newer officers that are coming into the area, and also those that haven't deployed as much due to the pandemic. We've got plans to work with HSCP colleagues to develop information sharing and that trends that we're speaking about, and improving the profiles for vulnerable people, maybe where they have an agreed plan with services. Officers at the front line need to know about that and to try and inform that better. And also looking at how we can really look at that person-centred approach, getting the right service at the right time for the most appropriate agency. It's something through our prevention model, through the in-depth review that the community inspector and the area commander are doing every day. We're continually looking at how we can get a better service to that person, and more importantly for me, the right service, because often a police officer might not be the person someone wants to see if they're at a time of crisis, but sometimes it's a necessity because there might be a risk to others or a risk to that person. But how can we mitigate that and reduce those occurrences by getting them the right care plan and working with HSCP colleagues? That's a snapshot, and a very quick snapshot of public health approach. I hope it's giving you some confidence that it's not just a strategy and it really is delivering in the front line. Local officers are currently engaging in the public health awareness sessions, which again will be tailored to the local area and the demands. But I'm more than happy to take questions or have calls with colleagues after this or at a later date with Jane to explain how we can develop it locally.
I'm aware of time. So if anyone has any questions, could they direct them to Greg or Jane? But if we're all in agreement, I think we could look at this in depth at the next meeting of the Cabinet, if we're all in agreement with that. Further ado, can we move on to item number 5 on the agenda, which is the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service Performance Report for the 4th quarter of 2021-2022. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just reiterate what the Chief Superintendent said about the outgoing chair, and welcome to yourself. Welcome to existing members and new members of Cabinet. Hopefully over the course of the next few Cabinets we can give you some comfort about what's happened with fire and rescue, and hopefully the report itself will make sense, and Alan will give you the context in a second in a bit more detail. I know we're going to talk a wee bit about the strategic plan, so hopefully when we knit all that together, it will start making sense for you and put you in a much better position to ask those searching questions for us. So, Chair, if you'll indulge me for 1 minute, I'm going to talk about something that I promised never to speak about again, and that's me. I have been in and out of this area since about 2009 and was born and brought up in Giffnock. My mum still is in Giffnock, worked for Eastwood and East Renfrewshire Council for over 30 years, so it's an area that's close to my heart. I've been the area commander within East Renfrewshire, Renfrewshire and Inverclyde since last June. So as I say, it's an area that I know well. And Alan is on the call. Alan is a group commander who's the cluster lead for East Renfrewshire. And at Clarkston and Barhead Fire Stations, you have Station Commander Charlie Timon. So Alan's going to talk through the 6 headings that form part of our report, and when we talk about the strategic plan, hopefully that will make a bit more sense. But really just a sort of ready reckoner for everyone in terms of our role moving forward. And we talked a wee bit there about water safety, and my challenge to a lot of partners and our staff is to continue and develop those conversations about how we can be community connectors. You know, we are a trusted brand of people, and we can open doors for people to access services and make them safer and more connected and more secure in their homes. So I'll talk a wee bit more about that after the report, but it's really about thinking out with what we would normally do. Traditionally, we have been doing it for a period of time, but it's really just raising that awareness amongst partners. So without further ado, I'll bring Alan, and Alan can take you through the report. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Chair. Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Alan Cochrane, as David's just alluded to there. I'm the Group Commander for East Renfrewshire. I'm looking forward to continuing to work with existing members, and I'm also looking forward to working with new members of the committee. And thank you for the opportunity to present a performance report for Q4, covering the period from the 1st of January to 31st of March 2022. This report measures our performance against the key priorities within our local plan for East Renfrewshire and the challenges we encounter in achieving these priorities within our communities. also highlights our continued commitment to address these challenges and the positive work carried out by the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service in conjunction with our partners to resolve them. As a service, we're making good progress in implementing our COVID recovery strategy, and we're applying business as usual where possible, whilst maintaining appropriate controls to keep our personnel safe and our property and fleet portfolio at maximum resilience to meet the needs of our communities. Chair, if I could just take one moment prior to getting into the body of the report, I'd like to highlight that the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service have launched their public consultation on our 2022 to 2025 draft strategic plan. The consultation will provide the general public and partners the opportunity to have their say on how we operate over the next 3 years. The draft strategic plan proposes 7 outcomes and shows how these outcomes deliver against the Fire and Rescue Framework for Scotland 2022 and the previously presented SFRS long-term vision. Each outcome also provides a set of statements that describe what success will look like when we've delivered against the outcomes, and it will shape our forward direction. The proposals outline how we will aim to make a significant contribution to making people's lives in Scotland better and safer, and to achieve this we need your views and opinions on how we can operate to the best possible level. It's about being able to showcase and enhance a service that we're proud to deliver and that people are proud to see, and we can only do this by speaking openly about how we can do things better and by further exploring the things that we feel we already do pretty well. This is your service, and we invite your input to help shape our decision making. You can access the draft strategic plan 2022-25 and tell us your views and what you think via our website www.firescotland.gov.uk, and I'll also put the details into the chat bar on this meeting. So thank you for that, Chair, and I will now go through the report. Firstly, I would like to give an overview of the activity and the equipment supplied during this reporting period. So, partnership community activities by our community action team. We carried out 25 in this reporting period. Community activities by stations, that's station personnel carrying out community activities, we achieved 63. We carried out 142 home fire safety visits in East Renfrewshire, and of those 96 were high risk ones. Post-domestic incident responses, which are responses immediately after an incident, where we'll communicate with the person involved in the incident and the surrounding premises and properties. We carried out 52 of those, and we generated 53 home fire safety visits from them. So again, showing the benefit of carrying out those immediate visits. And we also fitted 158 detection systems during this period. So moving on to the first indicator, which is accidental dwelling fires. You'll note an increase to the year-on-year indicator of 50%. However, this is against an extremely low figure of 10 in the same reporting period last year, which is an increase of 5 incidents over the 12-week period. It is pleasing to note an overall reduction of 9% on the 3-year indicator. Cooking is again the main contributor, accounting for over 60% of the activity. However, it is positive to note that detection was present in 73% of the premises and the detection actuated in 82% of them, giving early warning. Once again, this confirms a continued awareness regarding the importance of the installation and the maintenance of fire detection within the domestic premise. To support reduction in this type of activity, our community action team continue to be actively involved in engaging with partners through the Greater Results in Partnership meeting GRIP, as well as our various referral pathways to identify and support the most vulnerable within our communities. Our operational crews have also carried out targeted local initiatives, including leaflet drops, to identify the areas where we have more than one accidental dwelling fire. We are continuing to experience a trend within accidental dwelling fires, where it is evident that early intervention by partnership referral could greatly reduce the occurrence of this type of incident. This greater emphasises the importance of our continued application of the Make the Call campaign to partners and public. Moving on now to accidental dwelling fire casualties. I'm pleased to report that for this period, there has been no increase on the year-on-year indicator, with the total remaining at 0. It is also positive to note that there is a reduction of 71% on the 3-year average. During this reporting period, our operational crews carried out 142 home fire safety visits, of which 86 were high reach, meaning we are reaching the most vulnerable within our communities. It is also encouraging to note that a post-domestic incident response, which involves our crews engaging with the address involved at the incident, as well as surrounding premises, to ensure they have working smoke detection, has continued to be extremely effective, with an outcome of at least one home fire safety visit at every incident they attended. And our East Renfrewshire fire crews again achieved the highest attainment rate for this type of activity across the whole of Scotland. Next, I will cover unintentional harm. So year on year, we've had an increase of 150% in special service casualties, which equates to an additional 3 casualties. It is worth noting that this increase is measured against significantly low figures the previous year, and also positive to report a substantial reduction of 17% against the 3-year average. During this reporting period, our crews attended 4 road traffic collisions, which all resulted in minor injuries to the 5 casualties which were involved. Our community action team carried out a total of 25 multi-agency engagement activities across East Renfrewshire during this period, with a focus on road safety campaigns, including Promoting Road Safety Scotland and Project Edward, which is a campaign which focuses on the behaviour of other drivers on the road, including road rage and driver intolerance. And our teams are currently engaging with local schools to deliver the Young Driver Initiative, which is an educational programme which focuses on young and new drivers. It is also pleasing to note that in this reporting period, we again had no water-related incidents or casualties. We have continued to develop and progress our actions to reduce the potential for this type of incident by working with our partners in the East Renfrewshire Water Safety Group and by delivering a bespoke programme to our local schools. Moving on now to deliberate fire setting. It is pleasing to report a significant reduction of 13% in deliberate fire setting within the year-on-year indicator, and the 3-year average highlighting only a slight increase. The majority of these were secondary fires involving grass and woodland during a period of dry weather in this reporting period. Deliberate fire setting and fire-related antisocial behaviour continues to be a challenge for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and our data shows that the highest instances of grass, woodland and refuse fires occurs during the school holidays, early evening, weekends and periods of good weather. Reduction of this type of incident is a key priority for us, and as such our operational crews are actively involved in identifying the highest tariff areas and implementing reduction strategies through youth engagement at schools and by providing relevant advice to local businesses. These initiatives are supported by our enforcement and community action teams, as well as our partners in Police Scotland and East Renfrewshire Council. The 2 deliberate primary fires that occurred during this period were a caravan which had been set on fire and which caused minor damage to the property it was parked next to, and the second was a small fire in the ground floor of a flat which had heat and smoke damage only. Moving on now to non-domestic fire safety. There's been a significant reduction in non-domestic fires in both the year-on-year indicator and also in the 3-year average, with only 2 incidents in this reporting period. It is also pleasing to report that both were accidental and firefighter action was only required at one of the incidents. The damage in the property affected was also minimal, with only heat and smoke damage. The first incident was a fire in the fryer of a hotel kitchen, and the second was a small electrical fire within the switch room of a baker's, where the contractor suffered slight burns to his hands and he was treated at the scene by fire service personnel and then taken to hospital by a work colleague. Both of these incidents were accidental and both premises were subject to a post-fire audit carried out by our fire safety auditing officers. And Chair, finally moving on to Ufas, unwanted fire alarm signals. So it's disappointing to report a continued increase in unwanted fire alarm signals, and it is also concerning that the majority are again within educational facilities, with the cause primarily being accidental, deliberate acts or system faults, which again highlights that the majority are avoidable and are being caused by either human error or by deliberate action. The impact of human behaviour continues to challenge us as a service in this performance indicator, and even with our direct engagement via crews attending incidents and our phased reduction of appliances through our Ufas strategy, the main contributors are humans failing to follow procedures when testing alarms, deliberately setting off fire alarms. This has risen considerably within schools, and poor housekeeping causing detector heads to become contaminated. The reduction of unwanted fire alarm signals continues to be a key priority within East Renfrewshire, and we have applied unwanted fire alarm signal champions in each station to monitor activity and highlight to our enforcement team to allow them to engage at the earliest opportunity to investigate the most appropriate solution, whether it be mechanical, staff training, replacement of equipment, or where deliberate, identify the cause and pursue through the appropriate channels. Chair, this concludes my report. thank you again for the opportunity to present it, and I'm more than happy to take any questions that you or other members of the Cabinet may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. David, were you wanting to come in before I asked the question?
If I could, Chair, that'd be great. Just to provide just a bit of additional context for Cabinet members, and I'm conscious you've had quite a lot of information thrown at you today. So hopefully you can see through the 6 headings in that report the direct correlation between that warning and early detection from the correlation between accidental dwelling fires and casualties, and that's why we'll continue to make sure that people have working smoke detectors in their house. That early warning is vital. In terms of some of the other headings, unintentional injury and harm, so maybe harm in the home environment, you'll see one of the sections down there talks about assisting other agencies. That's a good thing. It's good that other agencies are reaching out to fire and rescue where they might not have utilised us before. So sometimes if that percentage of assisting other agencies is still within that section, I'm okay with that area of performance because it shows that we're helping where we can. Deliberate fire setting is a perennial problem, not just within this local authority area, but across the country, and as the Chief Superintendent alluded to there, we can be very much affected by good weather. So, but we will continue to work with young people, with partners to look at that. The non-domestic fire safety, that's a legislative side of our business. So our protection officers, both uniformed and support, will go out and support businesses through our framework, which looks mainly at sleeping accommodation, but will also attend, as Alan's pointed out, when somebody has a fire, so we can provide that wraparound support to them, see what happened and support them in terms of business continuity. And finally on Ufas, so unwanted firearm signals. So false alarms are different from Ufas. False alarms are the domestic sort of umbrella, if you like, and Ufas is specifically non-domestic premises. So it's important to remember that when we talk about false alarms, that's an umbrella term. Ufas is specific to that. It's been a significant challenge for us over the years. It's good that the systems are doing what they're intended to do in terms of providing that early warning, but where those alarms are avoidable, now bear in mind that some of these premises have quite a large, what's called a predetermined attendance, because they're industrial premises, they may get 2, sometimes 3 fire appliances sent. We are trying to reduce that road risk and improve business continuity. And that business, as Alan said, could be a school. We need to see that as a business, that we can keep young people in the class and hopefully minimise some of that disruption and stop those blue light journeys. So the organisation went through a consultation period last year, but it will be 2023 before the new Ufas delivery model will kick in. But I will provide updates throughout the year to Cabinet members. And I'll just very quickly finish just on what Alan had touched on, the strategic plan. Our local fire plan is in response to our strategic plan, which is in response to the fire and rescue framework for Scotland. So like all public sector organisations, we face financial challenges. So we've got to work with partners to make the most of the money that we collectively have. Things like the ageing population, growing number of people who face economic inequalities day to day are a challenge for us, and we need to understand what that looks like. But you'll be interested in that strategic plan, but what does that look like in East Renfrewshire? How does that national high-level picture manifest itself locally? So we produce those local plans and around those headings that Alan's just talked about. Even things like local staff appraisals are tied in to the local fire plan. So every 6 months, staff members will get appraisals. So one example of that, in response to Dementia Awareness Week last week, one of the Clarkston Watch Commanders has organised with partners dementia awareness training for all our staff across Renfrewshire. So it's not firefighting, but it does give our staff a better understanding of some of the challenges within the community and how we can support them a bit better. And I'll be attending one of those sessions in early July. So in terms of our core role, it's important that community safety starts with our firefighters and their ability to carry out their role and make sure they're safe. So we talked earlier on about the local inland waterway. So thanks to East Renfrewshire Council for their input there. We recently had a road safety event at Eastwood House. So it's good to be back out speaking to people face to face, and I met the Chief Inspector there. And we'll continue through the summer with that partnership delivery model. We now have the Scottish Ambulance Service co-locating at Clarkston Fire Station. They have office space, they have a appliance bay, and they now mobilise from that location. So that's great to have them in the heart of the community and getting there when we need them, and that increases our knowledge of their role, our skills, and builds those relationships both within the operational environment but also for training as well. So community safety is absolutely about how we improve the lives of those across East Renfrewshire, but it also means making sure our firefighters are safe and competent and trained. And my job is to maintain that frontline response and maximise public safety. So anyone that's seen Clarkston Fire Station recently, it looks a lot better. We have spent a lot of time and money there. Both the frontline appliances at Clarkston and Barrhead are very new. They have the latest technology on them, which is great to see as well, and welcome by staff. So we would welcome your feedback on the strategic plan, and subsequently when we produce that local fire plan, I'll come to future cabinets and let you see how we plan to deliver that across East Renfrewshire. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We only have a few minutes left of our designated meeting time, so can I ask Councillor Wallace to ask his question, and then Councillor Bamford.
Thank you, Chair. It's coming back to the unwanted fire alarm signals, I mean, half of which seem to be coming from schools. From what I can understand, there is a lot of deliberate pressing the fire alarm just as a bit of a lark. And we can actually find that staff and pupils are standing outside in the pouring rain, having to wait longer and longer and longer because invariably the fire department knows it's going to be a false alarm and take longer to come along. And the difficulty there is what happens when we actually have a real fire. The second thing is, and related to that, is that from what I can understand, the fire alarms in there's actually something, a cover on them now that when you lift it, it'll give a kind of preliminary alarm to let local staff know, oh, hold on a second here, who's pressing that button. So it's clearly a problem, and I do understand that schools are trying to do something about it, and it sounds a good idea that lifting that and actually directs attention to the person who is pressing the button. However, the big concern is just the longer and longer time it's taking for the fire department to get there under the assumption that it's going to be another fire alarm. Maybe you can give us some, another false alarm. So perhaps you can give us some assurances there. Thanks.
I absolutely can give you the assurance that regardless of the current Ufas response or the future Ufas response in 2023, all attendances will be made under blue lights to that. We never assume that. First Appliance will never assume that it's a false alarm unless they are told by a particular premises that's the case, but they will always attend under blue lights. Once they've made that initial assessment, whether it's a school, a hotel or any premises, they will tell further resources that may be en route to proceed at normal road speed. They'll still have that attendance there, but they'll stop that blue light road risk. But no, the First Appliance will always attend under blue lights on the assumption that there's an incident. In terms of the mitigation you talked about, Councillor, you're absolutely spot on. There's a number of ways in which you can do that. Schools sometimes, depending on how modern the building is, may have CCTV they can look at if they've got individual people within the school that have a history of this type of behaviour, then they can address it that way. But the cover is the first one, and then you've got a cover that's got an audible warning, and that in itself is much of a deterrent as well. So there's a number of measures that we can look at, but we also have that team of protection officers that are happy to work with head teachers and staff on site to see how they can help to reduce this. We actually suffered a bit, particularly in one of our other local authority areas. There seemed to be a bit of a TikTok craze for a while about doing this and getting, so we had a bit of a challenge there, but we will always work with them to find a solution, Councillor.
Thank you. I don't know if Councillor Bamford's available or not to answer her question.
Sorry, I had to take a quick call there. My question was answered by David, because I was going to ask about the Ufas, about the consultation that was agreed at the end of December. So it was just to ask when that would be coming into force and what effect he thought it would have. So that's been answered. Thank you.
It'll be in 2023, and as I say, we'll lead into that, Councillor, all the way and keep you informed.
Councillor Wallace, do you have another question? Your hand is up.
Yeah, just briefly, it's more to do with a recent incident, I believe, at McLaren Court in the Thumb in Giffnock. Had a fire, a kitchen was burnt, and there's a lot of elderly people there. I don't know, maybe I could go offline with yourself, David. Would that be possible, or whoever just could give me some feedback on that?
Not a problem at all.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay. How do we do that then? Do you have a contact number?
I'll put my contact number, my details into the sidebar for you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. Have we got any other questions for Fire and Rescue Service? With that, I will close this meeting. Thank you all for attending. It's been very informative. So please do stay in touch with the Fire and Police if you have any questions for them, especially on, I know many members of the Cabinet will want to know about the public health approach to policing, and if we can agree to take that forward to the next Cabinet, that would be great. Thank you.